Right, we might start. It's 6 o'clock, so there's still a few people that are supposed to come, but if they do, they can come in and sit at the back. All right, I'm Craig Mason from Mason's Lawyers, so thanks everyone for coming to our seminar on self-managed super funds. Just some housekeeping issues to discuss first. Toilets are through the lifts, or near the lifts. Mobile phones, if you can have them on silent. And any questions that you might have, either write them down on the pieces of paper that the Hub's kindly provided, or remember them, because at the end we'll have time for questions. If you really want to ask a question during the presentations, then maybe get the attention of the presenter, but if we could keep all questions till the end. And because we're in this sort of forum, questions or answers will only be of a general nature. Obviously we can't go into specifics about your particular case, but if you have a question that you really want answered, afterwards there'll be an opportunity to ask the presenter. We're starting at 6. We've got 3 presenters. They'll each go for about 15 minutes or so, aiming to finish at about 6:45, at which case we'll have questions for about 15 minutes. At 7 o'clock we've got drinks and nibbles being provided out here, and if we do finish early, obviously we'll get that started straight away. So they're the housekeeping issues. Now, there's some lucky door prizes too, which we'll hand out at the end, but, so hold tight on that. But I'd obviously like to welcome you all to our seminar. As you can see, it's a joint seminar between Mason's Lawyers, Infocus Money Management and Morms & Co. Accounting. We've got Jeremy Streten, Roland Knight and Dan Scougall here presenting for you, so I'm sure you're waiting with bated breath as to their presentation and very excited. So obviously we appreciate you taking your time out of your day to be here. We take that seriously, so we're trying to provide you with the most or the best information we possibly can. These 3 people are specialists in the area, so if you've come to the right place if you want to get the sort of information that they're providing. So who here wants to be a super landlord? Everyone? Yep. Great, you're at the right place. All right, so starting with Jeremy Streten, he's the Legal Practice Director at Mason's Lawyers. He specialises in structuring of self-managed super funds and property, so both sides of what we're talking about tonight. So welcome, Jeremy Streten.
Thanks, Craig. Right, so as Craig said, Mason's Lawyers. I'll just give a bit of an introduction about us. So we're a law firm based down in King Street, for anyone who doesn't know where we are, in the Lake Centre. We provide solutions for a better life. We do that by providing fast, accurate and comprehensive advice to help our clients obtain the best possible outcome in the most efficient manner. And we have a comprehensive range of products and services. I'm just going to show you them briefly, and then I'll get into the self-managed super side of things. So our services include acting for people in the building construction industry, criminal law, property investment, so people buying and selling properties, commercial advice in a broad range of company matters, conveyancing, so just standard residential conveyancing, debt recovery for businesses that need to recover their debts, dispute resolution, which is litigation, and estate planning, so wills and estates. But what I'm here to talk about today is part of our asset acquisition advice program, which is about, and in particular, borrowing money to buy properties in super funds. So can I ask anyone here, or everyone here, how many people have a self-managed super fund? Okay. And how many of you, have you bought property in that super fund before? Is that before or after 2007? After. Okay. All right. So people who don't have a self-managed super fund, I'll just give a very quick explanation as to what the super fund is. Just a self-managed super fund, just in case you're not aware of that. It allows people to control their own superannuation investments for their retirement. If you set one up, you're responsible for running it in accordance with and reporting to the ATO on its operation. We're here to discuss, as I said before, buying property and borrowing money in a super fund and the rules and regulations that govern that. So why is this important? It's important because it allows people and super funds to buy properties in a broader range of assets than they have previously been able to buy. It allows them to diversify their assets by gearing their assets through borrowing. So as I said, alluded to before, prior to 2007, the legislation governing self-managed super funds provided that if you wanted to buy a property, you had to do it in very strict circumstances. So it was very hard to buy, we couldn't buy residential property, and there were very strict criteria on what you could buy with the self-managed super fund. In 2007, the government changed the rules, which has been a great help to the industry because it's allowed people to buy properties and diversify their assets. And especially in buying residential properties in a self-managed super fund. So what the rules that changed were to allow people to buy property if it met 5 criteria. First of all, that the money that's borrowed is applied to buy the property only. Secondly, that the property is held on trust, so that the superannuation fund owns the beneficial interest in the property. I'll go into beneficial and legal interest in a minute. That the fund has the right to acquire the legal ownership of the property down the track. And that the rights of the lender against the superannuation fund for default are limited to that property only. And that the transaction for purchasing the asset is an arm's length transaction, which means that it's not a related party transaction, but there are some small exceptions to that that I'll deal with in a moment. I wanted to just show you a graphic, and if you have a look at the slides that are in the nice green folder that we included in your packs, you can cheat and have a look at the structure overall to begin with. But I just wanted to show you how you buy it, because it's a pretty technical structure, and if you don't get it right, there can be some serious stamp duty and tax complications from getting the structure wrong. So first of all, the superannuation fund selects the property. So as I said before, that can be residential, commercial, a retail or a holiday unit. The purchase, as I said before, should be an arm's length transaction, although there's an exemption for business real property. So if you're running a business from premises, you can transfer that property to a superannuation fund if you meet certain requirements. And as Craig said before, we're not here to give specific advice, but if you are interested in something like that, then you can come and see us and we can talk you through the rules. The legal title in the property vests in what we call a property trust. So how many people here have got trusts, like a discretionary trust? Yeah. For people who don't, basically what a trust does is it separates the legal and the beneficial ownership of a property. So the legal ownership is held by a trustee, and the benefit of the income and the capital gain, in broad terms, is owned by the trust. So the way that we set these up, that separates the legal and the beneficial ownership into 2 different parties to help to comply with the legislative requirements. So the property trust owns the property in its name, and it's not to be an individual or the trustee of the super fund. It's got to be a brand new company set up to just own that property in its name. It's an integral part and an important step in developing the structure, because it has to comply with that if it's going to borrow money under the legislation that was brought in 2007. As I said before, you've got to have a beneficial owner in any trust relationship, and that's the beneficial owner is the super fund. The lender is then given a mortgage over the property, but the loan is repaid by the super fund. The recourse that the lender has, as I said before, is limited to the property that the loan is over. So they can't go after other trust assets. The property trustee grants a mortgage over the property. All rent is paid directly to the fund. The fund makes all loan repayments, and the fund can deal with the property however and whenever they like. So they can lease, renovate, repair, or sell the property. I'll go into, there's a few restrictions on that as well, but they can basically do what they like with the property just like you own it in your own name. The super fund can pay out or reduce the mortgage at any time, subject to the terms of the loan. And when the mortgage is paid out in full, the super fund can have the property transferred back into their own name. So it gets rid of this relationship, and the super fund will just own the property without the property trust. As I said before, there are some basic rules that need to be complied with, and I just want to give a broad overview of those, and I'm sure Dan and Roland will go into some more detailed ones in their presentations. Generally, the super fund has to comply with all the super fund regulations, and that's why you need professional advisors who know what they're talking about when you're buying property. There are a bunch of legislative steps that have to be followed, and compliance methods that have to be followed, otherwise you're in breach of the Act. You've got to ensure that your investment strategy is in line with the goals of the fund. So you've got to be careful not to have, in most cases, and there are exceptions, not 100% of the funds in the super fund in one asset. Otherwise, you may not meet the diversification requirements of the Act. And you've also got to have risk management measures in place to make sure that the fund doesn't lose any money out of the investment as best you can. As I alluded to before, there are some mistakes which we see every day with people buying property, and you need to be aware of them if you do want to go and buy property in a super fund. Otherwise, if you don't do these things right, there can be serious tax complications that you can suffer as a result of not following some pretty basic steps and getting the right advice. The first one is to check out your prospective lender's requirements for a property. Make sure that they're actually going to provide the lending for the property that you want to buy, and make sure there are no hidden rules that are going to affect what property that you want to buy with the super fund. Establishing the structure. This is one that we see far too often, where people go and buy properties and haven't set up the property trust before they go and buy the property. If you do that, then unless you've got a lawyer who knows how to properly get around it, you can be charged double, triple stamp duty. Dan was just telling me a story before about a client who didn't set it up properly and had triple stamp duty paid against. Sorry, they tried to assess triple stamp duty, but they managed to get around it. But it's very important to set up structures first so that you don't have even those arguments come into play. As I said before, keeping the assets separate, so limited recourse borrowing, so that people can't attack the asset of the property, and it's kept separate. And the last one is renovations. You can't use borrowed funds to renovate the property. You can use other money that's in the super fund, but you can't use borrowed money to do renovations. You can only use it to buy the property. That's the legislative requirements at this stage. There are many more common mistakes that people go through. I know that Dan and Roland will have a chat about some of those just to bring you up to speed on the different types of mistakes people make so that you don't make them. So finally, I wanted to go through a couple of little scenarios and just to see whether people have been listening and whether they can pick the issues. So the first one is Mr. T attends an open house on a Saturday. He enters into a contract to buy the property. He hasn't set up his property trust yet, so he enters the contract in his own name. He contacts his lawyer and says that he wants to purchase the property in a super fund. What's he done wrong? Sorry?
Wrong name.
Yeah, he hasn't set up the entity first. He rings me and we go, well, you've done the wrong thing. We need to rely on the vendor to be nice and allow us to get out of the contract to be able to do that. Otherwise you get double or triple stamp duty. If he's bought it that quickly, he probably hasn't got advice from any lenders to make sure that the product that he wants to buy is going to satisfy their requirements as well. Yeah, so we can get around it, but it's just not ideal. You don't want to go down that path because you never know when the government might change the rules. Like having to drop of a hat. Scenario 2, Mr. H and Mrs. H own commercial premises in their own name. They operate their business from there, and they want to transfer the property and borrow funds from that super fund to put it in the super fund and basically trade the business from the property, leasing it to their from their super fund. Can they do that? The answer is that as long as they meet the business real person test, then they can do that. So I've had a couple of clients who did this recently. They have a commercial property down at Underwood, and they had about 4 or 5 leases and transferred the property into their super fund so that they could utilise borrowing the money through the super fund rather than having it in their own names. And finally, Mrs. P buys a dilapidated property but can only purchase the property with her super fund if she does not have sufficient other assets outside the fund. She contacts her advisors and wants to borrow money to buy the property and also undertake the renovations to the property if she doesn't have any other funds. Can she do this? No, she can't. She can't use borrowed funds to repair a property. So what I've given you today is just a legal overview. There's a lot more detail that Dan and Roland will go into about super funds. Has anyone got any questions about anything, any of the legal side of buying property in a self-managed super fund? Yes?
I've got a question about diversification.
Yes.
Does that mean
are that you need to have several real estate properties, not just one major one, or several title deeds, or...
It comes down to a question of your strategy, your investment strategy, and it depends on what you want to do and what other assets there are. That's probably a question more for a specific consultation about what your actual circumstances. So there's no set rule that we can point to.
But they can't say, no, you must have funds in other things other than real estate as well. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Good. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy, for that excellent advice. Next up, we have Roland, who is a senior financial planner with the Infocus Money Management Group, and he is going to enlighten us.
I've got to get the glasses, I will.
For the people that have just arrived, if you need to go to the toilet, they're out towards the list, and at 7 o'clock we're having drinks and nibbles, so make sure you stick around.
Okay, that's what we're here for. I'm going to do a fair bit of reading from the notes and the slides, but and there's a fair few slides. So that's where your pens and writing down questions on your paper would be really good. We can answer them later on. But there's a lot of information, and I want to try and be a little bit more detailed on what Jeremy's gone into. So just take it off. Okay. That's basically saying general advice only, and come talk to me later. A bit about Infocus Money Management. We make sure that you have the right amount of money at the right time, in the right hands, and in the right place. How? We develop a game plan to ensure that we have the highest probability of achieving our financial goals and objectives. So as a I've taken into account more than just all things financial. I will talk to you about your values, your emotional decisions, and your family's future. So, and I'll work with you towards achieving your financial goals for retirement by doing a number of crunching to determine the right solution for you. And that's where, when you borrow money, it's important to look at the cash flows, not only just in the first year, but years going forward. So that's where the number crunching comes from. A bit about myself very briefly. I'm a family man. My wife and I have been married for 30 years in next April. We have 3 adult children, 2 grandkids, 2 dogs and 5 chickens. I've worked as a planner since '81. I've obtained the Advanced Diploma of Financial Planning from Deakin. I ran and sold a successful financial planning practice for 21 years. And more recently, I've worked with 2 of the major banks as a financial planner. That's one of the main reasons why my wife and I opened this current practice with Infocus in 2006. We opened it with no clients, and today I'm proud to say that we have a growing client base of over 200. And with the help of my assistant, Shona, we're looking for more clients. So, Shona, you can say good day. And my wife, Anthony and Louise, came a little bit later as well. So, yeah. In 2008, the team at Caboolture won 2 awards, the Excellence in Business Award and the Quest Business Achievers. And that was with the help of the whole team there. Okay. Is a self-managed super fund right for you? That's one of the main questions that we will talk about in the first interview as well. So, why do people get into self-managed? Is it they want to have greater influence or control over their investments in super? As a general rule, you should only look towards starting a self-managed if your super balance is $200,000 above. Now, that's only a general rule because it will depend on contributions going in as well. I know in some circumstances there's been funds set up $50,000, sorry, so it's really important to have a check. That's just a general rule. There also may be certain people wanting to use more sophisticated financial planning strategies for investing, and these can include buying business real property, in other words, buying the property that you're currently leasing. It could also include unlisted private trusts and limited recourse borrowing as well. We're here, and of course we're here to talk about borrowing to purchase property. There are currently 400,000. I'll start again. Newspaper articles say that Australian house prices will continue to increase. So, and there are over 400,000 self-managed super funds in Australia. Now, on average, most of those self-managed have 2 members. So, husband and wife normally, and but they actually hold around 300 billion in assets. Now, I think that figure is slightly more now, which on average means that the funds hold about $800,000 in funds. So you've got to have and what that means is that the higher the value, the less the costs are involved as well. So, thousands of Aussies are turning to investing in real property because of the lack of the share market. Down the bottom is the reference to the tax office, so that's where those reports are coming from as well. This is a very complex process, so borrowing through an SMS can be extremely complex, and to do without professional advice is very dangerous. Each step must be in line with strict regulation, and the consequences of not complying can be extremely severe. That's where your team, your advisor team, come into the picture. With our assistance, you'll ensure that your self-managed is set up properly. The team will ensure the trustee allows for borrowing, and will also ensure the strategy is in line with the investment strategy. There's a question before about investing in more than one property. Absolutely, but just as long as it is part of the investment strategy that we put together. So you can't put an investment strategy in place without mentioning all those sorts of details. With infocus, we can assist you to put in place an effective strategy where trustees wish to commit to only part of the fund being under a diversified investment portfolio approach, and that will include residential or business property. The fund can, as Jeremy mentioned, buy property from business real property from a related party, and may not have all the funds to be able to do that, so that's where you're able to borrow. Okay, limited recourse borrowing is that the bank has only one asset securing the loan. A loan within self-managed can be provided by any of the following: a bank, or a member, or even a related party. So you don't actually have to go to the bank to borrow the money. Limited recourse borrowing is purchasing an asset with borrowed money that is held in trust. So the asset must stand alone as security with only cash within the self-managed as the deposit, which could be as high as 40% of the value of the property. In other words, currently owned assets cannot be geared. Banks will charge a premium over the standard variable rate, and all of the documents must be carefully read, so make sure you get professional advice in that regard. Most banks will require a corporate trustee. This corporate trustee can't be a trustee for any other entity. This is what Jeremy was talking about. I use the industry term called a bare trust, or a family trust, which will hold the asset until sold or the debt is paid. The trustee must also allow borrowing. So this is where we will confirm or even update the trustee if need be. The loan to the value of the asset must be lower in a self-managed than if you were borrowing outside of super. The banks will require all the documents, and the bank will also charge a fee to review the fund's trustee. They will also look at history of contributions and expected rental returns for the property. This may include may even include looking at your age and time frame for retirement as well. The approval process is not quick. So if you have a property in mind, make sure you talk to someone first prior to any money changing hands. Acquisition of a single acquirable asset. You can only borrow money to purchase one asset. Cannot use borrowings to finance existing assets, and cannot use borrowings to finance property development. The trustee must allow borrowing. It's pretty important. I think we said it once already. Aligned with the investment strategy and objectives. It must meet the sole purpose test, which is effectively getting into the, making sure that the super fund is meeting the legislative requirements to support you in your retirement years. There's more to that than just that too. It also meets related party transaction requirements, meets in-house assets rules, and if there's any transactions, make sure that they are at arm's length. And of course, we've talked about stamp duty or business transfer. Rezoning or subdivision of land, cannot have borrowings attached to it. Keep going. Okay. These rules only apply to an asset that has borrowing attached to it. So the Act allows borrowing to be used to maintain or repair an asset. It's likely to only apply in practice to property purchases though. Definition of maintain is that you are preventing damage to or deterioration of an asset to ensure functional efficiency continues. So you may use an asset to improve the asset. You may use existing funds to improve the asset, just not borrowed funds to improve the asset. So we have to make sure that that improvement does not constitute a replacement asset. So you can see how complex this is getting. For example, a replacement asset means you're not able to change the original purpose of the property just because it burnt down. We all know that when you buy any rental property that the tax deduction cannot be based on an improvement. That is, replacing the fence compared to repairing it. So you can, that's where you can't use borrowed funds to improve the asset because it may change the original purpose of the asset. I can see some worried faces there. The tax office has put out a 42-page application of key concepts ruling. If you like, you can read these things, and the reference number is that thing at the very top there, SMSFR 2012/1, and you'll find it on their website. So the ATO website has a lot of information on there if you want to do your investigations. It really has. Taxation considerations. See Dan. Please. But just very briefly, capital gains tax event is not generally until the final repayment of the debt, and of course if the asset is sold. Now, one thing we haven't talked about much at all, but this is a possibility, is that you can be in a joint venture with your self-managed super fund. You can have a joint venture. So I'm just putting it out there. So if you can't get money in, because of the maximum money that we can get into super these days, is that sometimes we may need to get the money into that self-managed super fund over a period of time, and to do that we can do it by a joint venture. This is a tad more complex diagram than what Jeremy put up, so I'm not going to even attempt to explain it. Please have a chat to myself or any of the guys here about the structure and how it's meant to be done. So it's really important that you have an understanding. The benefits and advantages of gearing is suitable to you if you self-manage has a high level of cash reserves and a steady level of contributions and income to support the cost of borrowing, and of course the ongoing expenses. In favourable market conditions, gearing can multiply your potential earnings, and of course achieve returns on your investments after taking account tax and other costs associated with gearing in excess of the returns that could be achieved without gearing. There are some risks. There are legislative complexities and associated costs. Typically they will include any changes to your trustee. There are higher loan setup costs, so the banks do charge to get their money. Additional costs of setting up the structures. And of course, particularly when you talk about a corporate trustee. And making sure that this structure is consistent with the fund's investment strategy and satisfies the sole purpose test. There have been some real changes, so if you've had a self-managed super fund for a number of years, it's really important that you talk to your advisors about making sure that the trustee is up to date. Other risks, there's obviously market fluctuations, the level of borrowing may multiply your potential losses also during unfavourable conditions, so have to keep an eye on that. Your investments may not provide the growth in income that you expect, hence the reason why diversification is important. Increased interest rates may affect the fund's cash flow, and any tax savings arising from the strategy is dependent upon the ATO allowing deductibility, and that's what Jeremy was saying before. The tax office laws can change. The return on the investment, e.g. the dividends or rent, may decrease temporarily or temporarily cease, which may place a burden on the cash flow as well. This is the reason why whatever we do in our number crunching, the cash flow is vital, because if you need to add more money to a super fund to pay for the ongoing expenses, you may be limited to be able to get money into the super. You may have used up all of your contributions that you're allowed to put in that 1 year. So you've got to be very, very careful, and that's why we build in all sorts of surpluses. So it may be more tax effective to simply purchase a negative gear property outside of super, and that's one of the options that we look at. We consider both sides of the story. Now we're going to be repeating a couple of things here, but I think it's worthwhile because they are important. Purchasing the asset in the wrong name. If the asset has borrowing against it, it cannot be in the same name as the trustee, which is good. A different trustee must be used, e.g. the corporate trustee or a bare trust. And of course, paying the initial deposit prior to establishing the SMSF is dangerous as well, because SMS cannot reimburse the member for personal deposits. All too often people have paid the deposit and exchange contracts before they even establish the SMSF. Very, very problematic. Gearing strategies using limited recourse borrowing that are not established correctly can lead to non-compliance, tax penalties and extra stamp duty being paid. In Queensland and WA, a holding trust deed must be signed before the trustees enters into a contract to acquire a property. So you must talk to your people, your advisors beforehand. It's you even have to be careful how the purchaser is described on the contract, because this could incur stamp duty issues as well. So it's the wording on the contract, very important. And yes, the ATO does frown upon funds that struggle for cash flow from the asset. So that's why it's always best to try and find either a mutually or positively geared property if you possibly can these days. Ensure the trustee is complying and up to date, lodge returns on time, ensure the minimum pension payment is taken. So if you're in the pension phase or you're doing this transition to retirement strategy, you have to make sure that there's enough cash and cash flow within the fund to make sure that's keeping up to date. And it's always a good idea to keep the assets separate from other assets. Oops. Just a couple of frequently asked questions. Principal and interest, yes, but again, all these sorts of lending, whether it be from yourself to the self-managed or from the bank, whatever, it all has to be in commercial terms. So the interest rates, so if you're buying a commercial property, the deposit will be much larger than if you bought a residential home, and also commercial lending tends to be between 10 and 15 years in length, as opposed to a residential term between 25 and 30 years. The banks are somehow getting away with personal guarantees. That's interesting in itself. And of course, if you're in pension phase, there is no tax at all. So I couldn't make it much clearer than that. 0 nil, nothing zilch. That's always good. Not all banks have the expertise to do this properly. Talk to us first. And can SMS borrow to purchase and develop vacant land? No. The legislation states that borrowed funds can only be used for acquisition of a property or repairs to an existing property. They cannot be used to develop vacant land or make improvements to real property. Set-up costs. Some costs that are charged by government bodies are fixed, but other costs do differ at times. So please come and have a chat with myself, Dan, Jeremy, or Craig, and a firm costing will be given at that interview. There must be a payoff to balance the cost. In other words, you must be improving the fund for the benefit of the members. Very important, you are running a fund for the members, and the members just so happen to be yourselves. Very important. Okay. There are lots of components to a self-managed, which include ensuring the fund stays compliant, maximising strategies and growing your fund to provide trustees with adequate amount for retirement. This is the sole purpose test. Must be an adequate amount for retirement. The investment strategy has already been talked about as part of the obligations and responsibilities for self-managed super fund trustees. Measures that were introduced on 7th of August 2012 mean that you as a trustee of the self-managed are required to conduct a review of the fund's investment strategy on a regular basis. You are also required to consider insurance fund members as part of the fund's investment strategy. And ASIC is no longer accepting the 0 to 100% in each asset class as an investment strategy anymore. But again, there's some changes around that. So as a team of experts, we look at your situation and determine what is in your best interest and how you can achieve what you want. Now, whether that be, as I said, inside a self-managed or outside, at the end of the day, it's got to be most beneficial to you. So come and have a chat, and thank you.
Thanks, Roland, for that very informative presentation. As you can see, there's a lot of information there, and I would encourage everyone to take Roland up on his offer of a free consultation. It's a good opportunity now to mention that Jeremy is also offering a free consultation to every attendee here. Dan is offering something even better. I won't go into that, I'll leave that for him to explain.
We get jelly
I'm not sure, is it available for these right now? Or
yeah, that's fine, yeah.
So,
the jelly beans.
Yeah, that's all. So, now we'll introduce Dan. He's the Managing Director at Mobs & Co, CPA accountants here at Caboolture. So he's an expert in these sorts of things. So, Dan.
That's great. Alright, well thanks for coming today everybody. I just realised there's a few more familiar faces than I thought around, so I've spoken to a few people here before. Definitely self-managed super and property investment, but what I'd like to touch on first is a bit about ourselves. So Mobs & Company was originally established in 2001 by the then sole principal Jamie Mobs. We've since grown to a practice of 3 partners and 17 staff across 3 offices. Myself at Caboolture, Jamie at West End, and Alex Miles at our Kiwana office. We specialise in all taxation matters, everything small through large, self-managed superannuation, audit and buying and selling of businesses as well. As a preamble to myself, I started in 2004, then working for Jamie. We had a team of 4. I've currently got, of course, 8 to 9, coming on the 9 years under my belt. And previous to that, I was working as a plasterer whilst going through uni and in the retail industry prior. Schooled through Murrayfield and Tullawong down the road here, so I'm quite familiar with the area, which is a fantastic area to work in, live and work in. I specialise myself in business sales and capital gains concessions. Probably my largest passion outside of super is being able to help people sell their businesses and walk away CGT free, utilising the certain exemptions there. And apart from that, there's my fiance and my speedway racing. It's a conflict as to which one's probably gets more attention there, but yeah, I won't get into that. So, favourite word we've probably heard here today, and my favourite thing about self-managed super is control. I think control is the most important factor. Rather than having someone else control your future, you're doing so yourself. It is your money. A lot of people have the conception that I don't get to see super till I retire. It's not my money, but it's your money, and if you can do certain things that are going to play in your favour in retirement, and of course that's what a super fund's all about, is building for your retirement, all the better. So why go self-managed super fund? It's your money, so we want to control it. There's flexibility in a lot of things, as we found out here with borrowing through property. Investment choice, and in certain circumstances it can be cost effective too. If you're coming from a retail or industry fund into a self-managed fund, they're percentage based. A lot of the time you'll find when you're in a self-managed fund, most firms like ourselves are fixed fee, so we charge for time rather than a percentage. So if you have $3 million in your fund, you're not going to get charged 2% just because you have more in there. You're going to get charged for the time taken to complete your work. Purchasing property, that's what we're here about today. I'll probably end up going over a couple of things as well. But residential, of course, you can't buy that from a member. So if you have a residential property at the moment, you can't transfer it in, be it your own house or a rental property. We'll wait and see, and maybe one day one of the politicians will want to do so and those rules will change, but not just yet. Commercial property we can, as long as you purchase at arm's length from a member. There's a lot of ways we can get that into the fund as well, and as I'll show you, you can free up a lot of money in certain circumstances by utilising your commercial property into the fund outside of super. So not only do it for your retirement, but also help you in the short term as well. Purchasing property. So previously we had to buy it outright or in a partnership. Now of course we're using the instalment warrant structures or the bear trust, which we've gone over. Of course, the requirement is you have to have your own self-managed super fund. All members are trustees, or in most circumstances we go corporate trustees. As I'm sure Jeremy and Roland and Craig will explain to you, if you were to ask them, it's almost 100% of the time better to go a corporate trustee nowadays. For borrowing we have to, but also in times of death it's an unfortunate topic, but it of course is a lot easier if you set up correctly from the start. The CPA tell us about 150,000, but yeah, we sort of go along the lines with Roland there of about 200,000. We've started many a fund with 50,000, as long as they're willing to build that each year. So if you're in your 50s and you're a small business owner, or you're an employee in the time in which they're going to increase those super contributions back up to the 50,000 that they were at, you could start building over 3 or 4 years and be quite worthwhile. But you wouldn't want to start with 80,000 and not be planning to actively build your funds up. Definitely a lot of complex rules, especially around the CIS legislation and setting up right. As Jeremy mentioned there, we did have a firm that we took over, and the previous accountant had incorrectly advised the clients on what to do, and they were potentially up for triple stamp duty, but we managed to solve that for them. Having the right accountant, financial planner, solicitor, and banker is probably an interesting point too. As you've heard a lot of things depend on the banks. We often get asked a lot of different questions as to what can I do with self-managed super, what can I do with borrowing within self-managed super. The bank is usually the hinging factor, so depending on what they're going to let us do is what we'll be able to do going forward. We've already gone through structures, fairly straightforward, directors and members and shareholders. There's a trustee company over the super fund, and of course it's building for the members' retirement. Okay, so borrowing and super. So the borrowing's got to be related to an asset that the trustee of the super fund is allowed to purchase. You've got to make sure your deed's up to date. We've gone through that, and it's non-recourse. But as Roland has mentioned, there are guarantees over the directors, so it's not completely non-recourse. It is to the fund and the assets within the funds, but they can still come after you as individuals, which is quite interesting. Obviously, you wouldn't set up a fund with a view to losing out in property that much, and of course, by having the right advice, you wouldn't put yourself in such a scenario. So we've already talked about the securities held by a third party through the way of a bear trust, and the beneficial interest is discharged on that day the last repayment is made. So I'll go through a bit of an example now. So we got here Sid and Nancy. They have $125,000 each, nice and neat, in their respective funds, and they're 52 years of age. They've been to see their advisor, planner and solicitor, and they've set up their self-managed super fund with a corporate trustee and rolled over through a plan or two into their fund to establish. I would like to point out too, if you do consider a self-managed super fund, I would urge you to get a financial planner like Roland to do your rollover. Many a time we've seen people attempt it, and the funds don't like it when you're taking your own money out of it. They do drag their feet, and you can lose a lot of money and have some frustrating phone calls with them over that period. In this example, they sourced an investment property for 400 grand. They're hoping to get the growth out of it, which is exactly what you want out of any property. They financed 280,000 of it, and they put 120,000 in. So they've gone with a 70% LVR on this one. Now, the rental income on this example, the property's bringing in 18,200. We've interest charged at 7.5%. Of course, that's changed now. We should be able to get a little bit better rate than that, which has given them $21,000 deduction. Agent fees average at about $1,200 a year. They're about 7 to 12%. Rates, insurance, maintenance, depreciation schedule as well. So in this example, we're working off a $13,000 negative gearing from having the property. Now, Sid and Nancy is still working. This is prior. In our current year, we can put $25,000 each person in as a tax concessional contribution. but that includes your SGC 9%. So if you're on $100,000 a year, you get $9,000 put in on top. That only leaves you $16,000 if you want the salary sacrifice, for example, into super. We hope that they'll go back up to 50,000. At this stage, it will for over 50s, year after next, but at this stage it's 25,000, but for the example purposes, I'm still working on 50 as I'm optimistic that with a change of government, perhaps we can get that back up. So with $50,000 each, you pay contributions tax of 15% into super, regardless of whether you've got a retail, industry or self-managed fund. With the negative gearing, there's $13,000 of tax deduction generated from that, which reduces tax payable within the fund of $1,950. So you can still reduce by having this property in there. Of course, at the end of the day, the main reason we want a self-managed fund and the property in it is a tax-free environment. If you are over 55, you can look at starting a transition to retirement pension, and Roland can advise you on these further as well, where we can turn your fund into a tax-free, put it in tax-free status, and only your new contributions will fall into a taxable category, which will be quite minimal compared to everything else in there. So your fund will pay no tax on earnings within, and it'll pay no tax on the capital gains at the end there. It'll only pay tax on contributions. Business real property example. So we've got here Bonnie and Clyde own their own business. It's valued at $400,000 also, and the property's debt free. They have a self-managed super fund with a balance of $600,000. They're both 54, and they have a mortgage on their home of $400,000, and their principal place of residence is valued at $1 million. Once again, as they've met the requirements as a business real property, they can transfer this into their superannuation fund and draw the proceeds, and they do this via the following. They go and get the right advice. They've gone to see Westpac. Now Westpac's one of the banks at the forefront of lending, and it has been since the outset of this. The fund has a deposit of $120,000. They borrow $280,000. The money's paid to Bonnie and Clyde for the property, so they get their $400,000 out of super, and they use it to pay off their non-deductible personal home loan debt. My business partner actually did the same thing with his, where he transferred one of his business properties in, managed to pull the money out, reduce his home loan, and of course he gets a concessional rate now on that rent rather than at a different marginal rate. So rather than paying themselves rent, which they may be paying, well, this year 32.5 cents onwards, they get it into a 15 cent a dollar tax haven, and they can utilise the funds to reduce their debt. So there's many options available, self-managed super, and many. I'll use the word tricks, but of course they're all above board. So little things that you can do once you get the right advice. We've already gone through this one. So yeah, as I've said, they're paying 28 grand, this example, of rent to the fund, and now of course they're getting a bit of negative gearing out of it as well, but it's all within funds they couldn't access just yet as another preservation age. So as highlighted, self-managed super funds give us the benefit of utilising direct property as a tax planning tool. Tax rates, as I mentioned, on accumulation phase, 15 cents. Tax on capital gains held for 12 months, effectively get a notional tax of 10% there. And once you hit the pension phase, as Roland well mentioned before, tax on income zero and your capital gains tax is zero. An ideal scenario, and of course that's where you work with a planner, is to have, in my opinion, your home outside of super and everything within super at retirement age. You know, if they do change anything, there would be grandfathering provisions anyway, but you'd be able to draw that money out tax-free being over 60 in the current environment, and you have the only asset that you can't hold within the fund being your home. Don't forget, is self-managed super fund the best option for you? That's something we quite often discuss. Things like insurance is where having the right advice helps. You can often roll over from a retail or industry fund, but you lose your insurances, so you do have to make sure you get the right insurance within the fund. The ATO are very strict. There's a lot of don'ts, and we can certainly help you with those. Get it right or pay the price is definitely the best way to look at a fund, but they're not as daunting as they once were, or as they might be conceived if you get the right advice there. So if anyone have any questions on the super side of things, I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one afterwards if you like.
You mentioned residential property is not appropriate, but did you exclude commercial residential property, something that you read out?
It gets really interesting there. Like we've had clients who have tried to do like Gold Coast units, for example. Say they've tried to get it into that category by saying I'm renting a holiday house, so it falls into residential commercial. That's where they try and push it. In that circumstance, we got knocked back and they wouldn't let us do it. It depends on specific property at this point in time. It depends on whether it's going to meet that business real test, and in that case it didn't, because it was still like it was still a residential rent rather than being a commercial transaction with a business as such, because you're renting to holiday makers. So it really depends on what exactly you're looking at going in. We'd have to have a bit of a in-depth look at it to make sure it was going to meet their legislation basically before we did it. What sort of property exactly were you talking about?
Oh, well, if you had 2 or 3 houses which you rented out to people, would that be?
Oh no, they wouldn't let you do that, like just residential. No, definitely not. I am hoping that they change it, but yeah, until someone in government wants to, I can't see that happening yet. They knocked that on the head. So we might have, and we've got several clients who have 5 or 6 homes, and unfortunately they can't get those into the fund as much as we'd like to, because it'd be a better environment for them. Yeah, so not at this stage, no, they won't let you.
And you can't sell it to your friend and invite no coffee. Maybe your friend.
Pay a lot of stamp duty.
That'd be the problem if you did set up something like that. Yeah, you get stung with stamp duty a couple of times along the way too, and of course the capital gain, which you have to get around. It's interesting though, if you, and of course I can't envisage just yet that they're going to let residential property happen, but if they did, and certainly now with commercial, there are a lot of, especially with business real property, there are a lot of concessions we can use if you do sell that property to the fund, where we can, because you do trigger a capital gain in your own name when you transfer it, but there are certain things we can use to get that gain down to potentially 0 as well on the way in. So not only do you pay no capital gains on the sale and get a higher cost base in your own fund, which may or may not matter depending on your age, we can also get money out of the fund. So there's a few little things you can do there, which gets quite interesting.
You mentioned age. What's the age restriction?
For setting up a fund?
Yeah.
At this stage, I believe at about 75 on their roll still. Yeah. So there are restrictions on how much you can put in, but yeah, it was 75 was the last one. They did increase it from 70.
What age? Sorry, what amount can you put in per year?
Once you hit 65, you have to be working. So you can put in at this year. Unfortunately, we can only put in $25,000 a year, regardless. It used to be under 50, 25, over 50. Now it used to be 50 and 100 previous, but now it's 25 across the board until the 2014 onwards year, 2014-15. You can put in $450,000 of non-concessional, so after tax contributions, in 1 year, and it lasts for 3 years, or you can put in $150 each year. So they do give you the option if you want a lump sum, but it'll span you out 3 years. So you can potentially put 175 in a year, but only 25 of that's going to be a tax deductible amount. Once you hit 65, you have to meet a working test, which entails doing, at this stage, it's 40 hours of work in a 30-day period you have to be doing, and if you do that, you can put your 150 in a year, but you can't use the bring forward rules and put 450 in, and that's only until you hit 75 and you can't contribute anymore. So yeah, they've made it a bit difficult to get a lot of money in. The higher in age you get, unfortunately. So
if you manage your own houses for rental, how do you sort of figure out how many hours a week you work?
And that's an interesting one, yeah, and that's probably where I would say that we try and say that it's more of a, they won't let us do it as a business for this purpose, but in that case, especially if you were self-managing or doing a lot of repairs and things, I'd push the fact that, well, you know, on 3 houses, you may well be doing more than that, and we have used that before for clients where we've said, well, they're not working specifically, you know, for myself or something, but they are working in the capacity as they're running a business off rental property ownership. So yes, we could utilise that.
You're doing a lot of the work yourself. So big business case you've got to put forward.
It is, yeah. But it can be done.
Would it be worth your while going to the ATO for a private ruling then in that case?
You could definitely, yeah. If you wanted the security, you'd definitely go private ruling. It's just probably a little bit more of an expensive option, you know, to get a private ruling with the amount of time it takes speaking to the ATO. They're quite difficult. You know, you might spend 2 or 3 grand doing that, but definitely you'd have that security in setting it across the line. So I'm happy to talk to you guys afterwards anyway and take further questions. Our special offer, yeah, we've got jelly beans at the office, so that's good. But we're happy to sit down and meet with any new clients regarding our self-managed super fund setup on us. That's no problem. We're also willing to reduce the cost of setting up a fund if you decide to go with us by $150. And for any current self-managed super fund holders, we would knock off 10% off your first invoice. in coming across to us for your first year. We currently have 170 funds on the books, so we're quite well versed in what we do. We've set up many borrowings and working with professionals like Masons and Infocus. I'm sure we can help you, but I'm happy to discuss it further with anybody. And thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dan. Is there any other questions for anyone else? No questions for Jeremy? Looks like it's confused. No? Alright. We have some lucky door prizes. We've got one or two? Two. So if everyone would like to turn their bags over, if you've got a special sticker, you're in luck. Anyone got a sticker? There's a sticker there. Anyone else got a sticker? No, sure.
It was worth coming, wasn't it?
All right, well, as I said at the beginning, there's drinks and food available. It should be there as we walk out. So if everyone would like to start making their way out there. Obviously, thank you very much for coming. I hope it's very informative, and I'd encourage everyone to take up everyone on their special offers and come and see us, and we can have a chat to you about it in more detail. So thank you.